Mute when you're not speaking.
We're now live, Chair. Mr. Mayor, we're now live.
We're now live. Welcome everybody. I'm ready to open the meeting. Now, can I call on members only to use the chat facility to indicate they want to comment on a report, or if they have a technical issue, but not for posting any other messages. Okay. Now, good evening. Before we start our meeting, could we ask Father Michael, the Mayor's chaplain, to begin with a prayer? Father Michael.
Okay, Billy, thank you. Be pleased, O Lord, with our humble prayers as we deliberate your will for your people, that we may act always with integrity and with honesty. And even though we have no merits to plead our own cause, come we pray to our aid with your protecting mercy and guidance. And we make this prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Father Michael. I appreciate that. Okay. Before we begin the meeting, I am inviting Councillor Cllr Emmett to address the full council.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the full council meeting held on the 15th of July, I made a derogatory comment about Councillor Jackie Beswick whilst my microphone was switched on. I now give a full apology to her, and I am sorry for any offence I have caused her. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Emmett, and I appreciate that. Thank you. Now, before we continue, this is Mayor's announcement. And before we carry on with the remainder of the agenda, Council may be aware that Sally McIver, Director of Commissioning, and David Wilcock, the Monitoring Officer, are both due to retire at the end of December. And tonight will be their last council meeting. Now, I know all members will join me in wishing them both well. Now, I would like to record our thanks for their dedication and commitment to Rochdale and the council. Now, could I invite the leader and Councillor Sullivan to say a few words? Councillor Brett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for this opportunity to say and thank Sally McIver first. She is a dedicated, hard-working officer, we all know that, and she'll be sadly missed. But the tribute I want to pay to her is that she's the one officer who's managed to make, or at least give me some understanding of how the NHS works and its finance. And I think that's a tribute not only to her hard work, but to her skills. Okay. And I will be saying further private farewells to her and thanking her. As for Mr. Wilcox, I'd also like to pay tribute to him and say, of course, he was the council's monitoring officer. So that was one of the few people you didn't want to meet on a regular basis in his monitoring role. And of course, I have been reported, as are many others. But I think in paying tribute to these two officers, I think we show the value of public service, which has been especially illustrated in this COVID crisis. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brett. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Sally. I haven't dealt with her personally on a one-to-one basis at all, I don't think, but I've met her in meetings and I found her very comprehensible, utterly charming and very approachable. So I wish her well in the future, and I'm really extremely sorry she's going. And those comments and more, I'm sure, are from Councillor Durnley as well. As for Mr. Wilcox, I'd just like to read out comments and thanks from Councillor Durnley. Excuse me. And he's emailed me and said, David Wilcox will be retiring this evening. I'm sorry I'm not there to wish him well. He is a great officer who always goes the extra mile with a sense of humour and with empathy in all issues. He is a thoughtful and considerate officer with all the best qualities of the public sector. I wish him well, and so do I. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sullivan. I must admit that I was once up in front of the monitoring officer, so I joined Councillor Brett on that one. But I only know for once was enough, I'll tell you. So we wish them both a wonderful retirement.
Yes.
And God bless them both. Right. Moving on to item number 3, and that's the declaration of interests. Now, do any members have any personal, prejudicial or disclosable pecuniary interest that they need to declare at this meeting?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Ryan.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to declare a personal but not prejudicial interest in item number 12, which is the council tax empty property charge. I am a director of a company with commercial and residential business interest in the borough, although I don't have any long-term empty property or even for that matter, empty properties. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rana. That will be recorded. Thank you. Can I ask any members now?
Mr. Mayor,
Turn off the chat feature and I will read them out. We're now going to go through.
Mr. Mayor, all right, thank you,
Sorry,
Mr. Mayor. Can I declare an interest as well in item number 7, please?
Item number 7. Is that recorded? Thank you, Councillor Wade. Right now, I'm now going to read out the
Item 2, apologies.
when do I do the named list?
Item 2, apologies, Mr. Mayor. Item 2.
Where's the apologies? I've got it. Item number 2, apologies for absence. I have received apologies from Councillors Ali Ahmed, Councillor Durnley, Councillor Farnell, Councillor Ormby, Councillor Nixon, Councillor Nolan, Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Wazir. Are there any other apologies I don't know about?
Can I give the apologies, Mr. Mayor? If you heard the phone ring in the background, Amna Mear's been burgled, so she sent her apologies, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, that's sad. Thank you, Councillor Brett. Now I'm going to do the roll call and I'm going to do it alphabetically. As I call your name out, will you unmute and confirm your attendance so that it can be heard? It's important that we hear what you that are here. Hear that you're here. Okay. Councillor Ali Ahmed. Iftikhar Ahmed.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Shakil Ahmed.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Dilat Ali.
I'm here, Mr. Mayor.
Sultan Ali.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
David Bamford.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Bamford's been delayed on a crash on the M62 and he'll be with us shortly.
Noted. Councillor Besford.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bezic. Councillor Blundell.
I'm here, yeah. Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Boris.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Brett.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Burke.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Cox.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dale.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Davidson.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dutton. Cllr Emmett.
If it's
Neil.
me, present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Susan Emmett.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Ermsley.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Garthside.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. I'm present.
Councillor Hartley.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Eakin.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Holly.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Howard.
Not the same name, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hussain.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Joinson.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kelly.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Malcolm.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Martin.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Massey.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Meredith.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Nixon. Councillor Nolan, Councillor O'Neill,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor O'Rourke,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Palucci, Councillor Rayner,
Sorry, present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rayner,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rashid,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Robinson,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Robotham,
Good evening, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rush,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Smith,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Angela Smith,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sullivan,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Taylor,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wardle,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor West,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Donna Williams,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Peter Williams,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Winkler,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Waith,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Zahir,
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Zaman.
Present, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, it's Councillor Warren. Can I just say that I'm also present? I'm not a Howard anymore.
Oh dear. Committee services I shall get on to. Okay, apologise.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, I'm going to move the minutes of the council held on the 14th of October. Mr. Deputy Mayor, would you please second the minutes?
Yes, I do, Mr. Mayor.
They are approved. Thank you. Item number 5 is public questions, and there are no questions that have been received this evening from the public. Item 5 is motions. This evening we have 4 motions for consideration by the council, and they are set out on the agenda. Now, I must remind members that council has up to 20 minutes to debate each individual motions. Now, there's an alterations to the order of the motions set out in your agenda pack. I am bringing forward motion number 3. This is due to the proposer needing to attend another meeting that clashes with this one. So I'm moving to agenda number 3. Councillor Blundell, you move your motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for moving the motion forward about this item. Now, I'd just like to say, normally motions say we are writing to somebody it's on a specific issue, and this is a very procedural motion, but I don't want members of the public to underestimate its content. Since GDPR legislation come in, naturally we are a local authority, and we have, we will hold very high standards when it comes to implementing legislation such as that, and safeguarding people's data. But unfortunately, because of this, our very robust policies, it's starting to sometimes get in the way of helping us as members represent our constituents. There's been a number of recent cases, albeit these have all been very small, but we did feel as members that many of us were not able to access the information we required to help represent our constituents. Sometimes it was on matters such as school places, trying to represent them during an appeals process. There was also when complaints have been made about the council, not councillors, but about a policy or the way something has been carried out. And members have been unable to contact that person to actually get more details about what has gone on. Now, obviously, these have been minor. My one's about rats. Other people's has been about some other minor issues. But one day it might be a more serious issue, and we as members will not be able to access that information. And I will add, Mr. Mayor, this isn't because certain officers have been obstructive. The opposite, they're often very helpful. It's because this is new legislation. It's not had time to bed in. I believe the council is being too cautious in its approach in this area, and that's why this motion asks to set up a committee which includes members and the chief executive to make sure that we continue to comply with the law but we set up policies of the council around complaints and how we access information to ensure that members can contact members of the public and get their information to do so if it means that we are helping them with their complaint or if it is in their interest. I'd like to say thanks to the outgoing director, David Wilcock, who has been involved in the issue I faced, and he actually went to seek external counsel and has been very helpful in helping formulate that. But nonetheless, I don't think we see eye to eye specific issues, and he's been very helpful in helping us set out what those are and what that committee will look into. And that's because, like he shares a passion for us being able to represent the public and them accessing council services. So on that note, I'll pass over to the secretary. I'll reserve my right to speak at the end if there is any debate, although it is a very procedural motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Holly, will you second the motion and address the council, or indicate if you wish to reserve your right to reply until later?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm delighted to support this motion. It is vitally important, as Councillor Mundell says, that we represent our constituents to the best of our ability. But data protection laws are very complex issues, and I think that the right thing, the right way to approach this issue is to have a committee, which I'm more than happy to sit upon as a member, so we can consider the issues that we need to address, and obviously take soundings from members and to bring back appropriate recommendations to council. So I think this is a very sensible move. So as I say, I'm more than happy to support the motion, and also, like Councillor Bundell, to thank David Wilcock for his input into some guidance as to the best way to actually address this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Is any other member wishes to speak? Councillor Cllr Emmett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm about to say I rise to speak, but I forget that we're not in the council chamber, so I sit to speak in favour of this notice of motion. I think what's really required as well from this is a certain amount of training and clarity of information, and as Councillor Blundell has said, sometimes information hasn't been forthcoming to elected members to allow us to do our job to represent people, and it's not been done deliberately or through any force of malice through officers. I think there's a simple, it's quite, the law can be quite nebulous in places, and we need to make sure that we've got proper guidelines for the information which has been shared with elected members. But I also think there's an issue, because I do think that there are some people who don't fully understand or appreciate the role of democratically elected councillors as well. And again, not through malice. I think a lot of it is through sorry, somebody's talking. I think it's done really through not having the right information and through a certain degree of ignorance as to the role of elected members. And if people have never been told what that is, then clearly that's not their fault. So I support this resolution, Mr. Mayor, and I, for one as well, would be more than happy in serving on such a working party.
Thank you, Councillor Emmett. Anyone else? Councillor Blundell, you have the final right to reply, or have you covered all the issues you wanted to cover?
Yeah, no, just on the point that Councillor raised about training, I think that will be vital importance. And when we do sort of the working group, we'll send round an email to ask those members who want to be involved. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Can we now move to the vote on the motion? I'm going to start the roll call, and again, when I call your name, please indicate if you wish to vote for, against, or abstain. Please be clear. Councillor Iftikhar Ahmed.
For.
Shakil Ahmed.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Dalat Ali.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Sultan Ali.
For.
Councillor Bamford. Councillor Besford.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bezic. Councillor Blundell.
I'm for, believe it or not.
Councillor Boris.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Brett.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Burke. Councillor Burke. Councillor Cox.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dale.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Davidson.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dutton.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Emmett. Neil.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Emmett Susan.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Emsley.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Garthside.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hartley.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Eakin.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hawley.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry, Jane Howard.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hussain.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Joinson.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kelly.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Malcolm.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Martin.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Massey.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Meredith.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor O'Neill.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor O'Rourke.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Palucci.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rana.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rashid.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Robinson.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Robotham.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rush.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Susan Smith.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Angela Smith.
For, Mr. Mayor.
And Patricia Sullivan.
Sorry, for Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Taylor.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wardle.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor West.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Donna Williams.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Peter Williams.
For.
Mr Winkler.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Waith.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Zahir.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Zaman.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Motion is carried. Thank you. I move on to motion number 1 now. Councillor Sean O'Neill, would you move the motion?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm really pleased and feel privileged to be moving this this evening. In the past, I was actually a union learning representative and part of this programme. It may be confused that trade union education and the union learning programme are the same. They're not. Trade union education is funded through trade unions. The Union Learning Fund was set up by the previous government. Has been going about 20 years, and you see on the motion all the facts and figures. But it was announced recently that by the government to scrap the lifelong learning programme. More than 42,000 people have signed a petition calling on the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, to reverse the plans and allow workers to access education, skills and training. And that's what it's all about. The ULF allows workers and their families and friends to expand their skills and employment prospects. Over 17,000 learners have benefited from the scheme, studying subjects like fitness, nutrition, digital skills. When I did it, we did French, Spanish, digital photography, a raft of things, but they were all underpinned by a basic English and a maths level 2. And that's where the funding came into being. And they were provided through the colleges, through our own Otwood Hall College, Wigan College, Oldham College and Stockport College. And it's been calculated that for each pound spent on the project, £6.93 was generated for learners and £2.63 for employers, leading to £2 in returns to the Exchequer. The economic contribution of the project is in excess of 32 million and has helped to increase wages by £16.5 million. Just in summing up, in the midst of this worsening crisis and unemployment crisis, it's unbelievable that the government plans to cut one of the most effective programmes allowing workers to expand their skill set. Thousands of workers have received vital training and guidance through the Union Learning Fund, and it's crucial that the government reverses this decision. I'll move the resolution, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor O'Neill. Councillor Dutton, would you second the motion and address the council, or indicate if you wish to reserve your right to reply later?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have the greatest of pleasure of seconding this motion eloquently put by Councillor O'Neill. I will speak now if I can, Mr. Mayor, and I'll leave the final words to be said by Councillor O'Neill. I was amazed when I heard of this actual motion being put to council tonight when I read it. I hadn't heard about anything about ministers trying to close the Union Learning Fund. The fund, as Councillor O'Neill has already said, supports the widening of learning and training. Written in the motion, which people have in front of them, hopefully, you know, over 200,000 workers have gained benefit of this scheme. It provides training in literacy and numeracy, ICT skills and apprenticeships, and many, many more. Mr. Mayor, I could go on, but in these times of austerity, COVID-19 and job losses, this is just not required. As I speak to you here tonight, I'm a recipient of this training in the past. I gained my literacy and numeracy through this actual course. Without that, I wouldn't have got my teaching degree, and I could go on. This fund provides hope for the people of what we've gone through in the last 9 months with this COVID-19. It'll give hope of future training for all the people that have lost their jobs and more security for the public at large. And I'm sure that the public listening to this debate tonight will be welcoming that we can put this motion through and overturn this cynical thought of getting rid of this training fund. Surely this is the wrong thing to do, Mr. Mayor. At this time or any time in the future, it should not happen. I hope and pray that in these troubled times, this motion would get cross-party support in acceptance of this motion. And I just hope and pray common sense prevails. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Dutton. Now I've got 3 members who have put their names down for comments. I will start with Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ending the Union Learning Fund from March next year is clearly a retrograde step, a step which makes no economic sense. Tesco's, Armour Foods and Tata Steel are among the many employers who are supporting the campaign to persuade the government to rethink its plans to scrap the Union Learning Fund. Tata Steel's HR Director, Chris Drakes, has said recently, "This brilliant initiative allows us jointly to raise the capability of our workforce, resulting in a more effective and productive organisation." He went on to say that the loss of the ULF would certainly be detrimental to achieving the pace of change and future workforce skills to which our industry aspires. Mr. Mayor, since 2010, there's been a dismal record of government departments tackling low skills and learning for workers, and this stands in stark contrast to the achievements of the ULF. The take-up of basic qualifications, English and Maths to level 2, declined by 30% from 2013 to 2018. By contrast, the ULF supported projects covering a range of qualifications for workers. They have consistently exceeded their targets. The University of Exeter recently calculated there had been an overall benefit for employers and individuals of £1.4 billion in return for an annual grant of 12 million. Mr. Mayor, it's clear that in reality, ending this funding is an act of vindictiveness, anti-union spitefulness from Gavin Williamson and his government, for which there should be no legitimate justification in 21st century Britain. The government recently had no answer to the MP Lillian Greenwood in a recent parliamentary debate when she asked, which organisation will replace Union Learn? The losers, Mr. Mayor, will not just be our economy, UK productivity and our communities over the next decade, but the aspirations of hundreds of thousands of people. All this will do in our borough is to level down. So I look forward to reading the response for the MP for Haywood and Middleton, Chris Clarkson, who was elected on the soundbite of levelling up. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Dale. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This motion is inaccurate and it's also misleading. What I've read in the motion talks about undermining things as they are. Well, this motion does nothing of the sort. The three councillors have spoken this evening, have spoken about cuts, they've spoken about austerity, and they've spoken about a retrograde step. This is actually nothing of the kind. The facts here are the government is spending £2.5 billion on the National Skills Fund and the changes in how that's being provided. The government have said this will be provided through educational establishments. And I see absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think this is a case of horses for courses. Educational establishments are best placed to train people in the same way as the TUC do a marvellous job of looking after people's rights. I do think the approach the government are taking in these unprecedented times, they've ring-fenced an unprecedented amount of money to go into training, and that's necessary as we come out of this pandemic. We all recognise there is a need for greater training to boost the economy, and the government are taking that and making sure they're doing exactly that by putting the money into educational establishments. The motion talks about all the good work that Union Learn has done and all the examples of success. I don't doubt that for one moment, but that doesn't mean in my mind Union Learn is best placed to deliver education. And it doesn't mean Union Learn is an exemplar for good practice going forward. I'm firmly of the opinion that educational establishments are rightly placed to deliver education going forward. And as I said, the TUC are experts in other fields. The thing I do find this quite bizarre. The thought of taking money away from educational establishments and placing it into other hands just is simply wrong. It isn't what we should be doing at all. Councillor Dale mentioned at the end that an MP wasn't able to say where the money was going to be spent. That's because that aspect of it isn't going to be announced until the new year. So how on earth can you expect somebody to answer a question that hasn't been announced yet? Given the way and the time this has been brought to council, when not all aspects of it have yet been announced, makes me feel this is 100% politically motivated and it's not for the good of the people of our borough. So on that basis, I cannot support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Following on from Councillor Taylor, it is very, very important to clarify that funding for this union programme is being redirected. The funding for training hasn't been scrapped or got rid of or cut, which is all things that have been said by members on the other benches. As part of the pledge to levelling up, the Prime Minister recently set out a series of reforms to ensure everyone can get skills that they need. He's committed to funding the Lifetime Skills Guarantee. The redirected funds are going to directly support investment in skills and further education. He's invested over 1.5 billion in capital funding for further education estates. The skills toolkit that will provide free digital and numeracy courses for people. And the toolkit places particular emphasis on the skills that businesses actually need. This commitment has been welcomed by the CBI and BT, amongst others. Mr. Mayor, it's a matter of union funding, which is not of operational relevance to this council. In relation to the resolution set out in the motion, I would like to seek a clarification on the point of order, because I think that in asking the Chief Executive to write to MPs on this political matter relating to union funding and then publish their responses, the Labour group are seeking to politicise the offices of this council. Those offices should be impartial, and it's unacceptable that this motion is seeking to influence them. Now, under section 4.2.11 of this council's code of conduct, it says that the Chief Executive is responsible and accountable to full council for all aspects of operational management. Mr. Mayor, this is not operational. This is not a matter that he is accountable for. It's of a political nature, and he should not be getting involved. This motion clearly seeks to undermine our own code of conduct, and it should be withdrawn. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd always be wary of those who seek to squash debate by point of order. It is typically the route of the scared and worried. And to be fair on this one, I think I'm going to have to quote a member of Parliament on this, because I think they actually put it right about the scrapping of the Union Learning Fund. It seems a strange way to react to this by scrapping a successful scheme. In doing so, this looks like unnecessary union bashing rather than supporting a skills programme that delivers good outcomes and value for money. That obviously militant sounding MP is the Conservative Member of Parliament, Robert Halfon, who is the chair of the Education Select Committee. I'm saddened that the Conservative group, or at least the two speakers so far, have chosen to denigrate this value for money scheme. And surely we should all want schemes that provide value for money as a council, as the opposition benches like to tell us, you know, money is tight and, you know, therefore we have to spend money efficiently. Well, guess what? This is spending money efficiently. Guess what? The chair of the Education Select Committee supports this scheme as a way of directing funds to educating people as a way of levelling up. That MP is a Conservative MP. This shouldn't be a political point. And I'm saddened that you guys have made it a political point. And I do look forward, because I think it is of vital interest to residents in our community in Haywood and Middleton, and the wider borough in Rochdale, to see what our members of Parliament, let's not forget Tony Lloyd also has to comment on this, and I'm sure he'll have views on it as well. I don't know why Councillor Winkler chose to focus on talking about certain MPs, but hey, there we go. Let's pass this motion unanimously. We've had Labour MPs and Tory MPs speak out about this scrapping of a scheme. And let's not remember, the TUC is actually a politically neutral body. Although there are some unions affiliated to the Labour Party, the TUC is not affiliated to the Labour Party, and indeed contains many, many unions which would not consider themselves natural allies of the Labour Party. So actually, you are affecting workers across the board. So we're trying to help these workers level up. I hope you, all groups tonight, choose to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Sean O'Neill, if you wish to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very interesting debate. Not surprising comments from the opposition. Rather disappointing. I think they should have done a bit more homework on the Union Learning Fund. It is a means of delivering lifelong education, lifelong learning, and to scrap it, to come out and scrap it, is, as somebody really pointed out, it's a pernicious move by the by this Cllr government, who really tell us to well let's go to the education establishments. Well, I'm sure I said that in my opening speech, that the Union Learning Fund, that's where they got their education from the union. I named the local establishments here in this town, Hotwood Hall College. You know, it's unbelievable. But there you go. You know, it doesn't surprise me. I suppose I could go on and on and on, but I think the bit about the only people who can reverse this decision is our MPs, and would like to know what they've done about it. That's what we're asking. Are they looking after the workers? Are they looking after the residents? Let's see. That's what we're asking. And the chief executive, we're asking him to write the response from this resolution. So we'll go to the vote, please, Mr. Mayor. I move.
Thank you, Councillor Sean O'Neill. Members, I've consulted with my governance officer, and the motion was, I understand, accepted by the chief executive and the monitoring officer. So I'm now going to move to the vote. Okay. Again, could you state very clearly whether you're for the motion, against the motion, or you abstain? Iftikhar Ahmed.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Shakil Ahmed.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Ilat Ali.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Sultan Ali.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bamford.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Besford.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Blundell.
I'm for, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bezic. Councillor Boris.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Brett.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Burke.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Cox.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dale.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Davidson.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dutton.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Neil Emmett.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Susan Emmett.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Janet Emsley.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Garthside.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hartley.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Eakin.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Holly.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Warren.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hussain. Councillor Hussain.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kelly.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Malcolm.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Martin.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Massey.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Meredith.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor O'Neill.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor O'Rourke.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Pellucci.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rana.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rashid.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Robinson.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Robotham.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rush.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Smith. Susan.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Angela Smith. Councillor Angela Smith.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sullivan.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Taylor.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wardle.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor West.
Definitely for, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Donna Williams.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Peter Williams.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Winkler.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor With.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Zahir.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Zaman.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. The motion is carried. Thank you. Can I move on to motion number 2? Councillor Smith, will you please move the motion?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'll move the motion. Is it okay if I read it?
Do what you wish, yes, as long as you keep it quick, please, we're running out of time, okay?
If we're running out of time, I'll take it as read and then I'll listen to the debate. Is that okay?
Certainly is, yes.
Thank
Councillor
you.
Meredith, will you second the motion and address the council? I'll indicate if you wish to reserve your right to reply later.
I would like to formally second the motion and I would like to reserve my right to reply later on. Thank you.
We have a submitted amendment to this motion, so I'm now going to move straight to the amendment. Can I ask Councillor Sullivan to move the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I would like to say that the objection to and the reason for this amendment is paragraph 4. And whoever wrote this, and it's not very well written, has to realise that, must have realised there was no way we could agree to that, and it was probably done purposely. If it was done because they didn't understand what they were writing, there's even less excuse. To say the council requests that the government is made fully aware of the negative impact that these issues are having on the people, their families, etc., etc. Of course the government is aware. That's just such a ridiculous statement. And I'd just like to make a point that Councillor, you have to bear with me, Councillor Durnley particularly asked me to put this forward. And it's that you probably all realise he's off at the moment and he's off with what is probably called nervous exhaustion, as he's been looking after a friend of his who had a very severe mental nervous breakdown, wasn't eating, thought his food was poisoning, the usual, never sleeping. Councillor Durnley has had weeks and weeks of this stress. That is why he's off. However, he wanted me to say, in spite of all this, and without the help he's had from the mental health services, the great help, the continued help, and no problem at all, he would have gone under. But they did come to his aid, as they would have come to anybody's aid. And I think to say that the government is unaware and things aren't happening is just totally untrue. And I would just like to have to read this because I don't want to miss any of it out. I don't usually read statements, but this one I'm going to read. I've actually written it, and as carefully as I could, doing a bit of investigation, which has not been done for this motion. No research has been done on it whatsoever. It's just bald statements, and it's all going wrong. Everybody's suffering. Government's doing nothing. No evidence in it whatsoever. Well, here's a little bit of evidence for you, Mr. Mayor. Around 2/3 of people with long-term physical health conditions also have comorbid mental health problems, most commonly anxiety and depression. With this in mind, I particularly welcome the commitment of the government's NHS long-term plan to expand access to psychological therapies for adults with common mental health problems, with a focus on those with long-term conditions. In other words, if you've had cancer and not been able to get your treatment, or were frightened of getting it, or you've even want a hip replacement or in desperate pain, you will get mental problems with this. And this is what the government's actually dealing with. By the end of 2021, 1.5 million people will have access to these services each year, with an additional 380,000 accessing them annually by 2023. I am sure this will be extremely welcome news for many sufferers with long-term conditions, And I urge anybody already experiencing mental health related problems on ongoing physical illnesses to get in touch immediately with their GP. I also welcome the government's commitment that by 2021, where appropriate, every person diagnosed with cancer will have access to personal care. Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. I have had cancer and I didn't have this type of personal care. And it's so important because really at those stages in your life, you do have mental health issues. This includes assessment, a care plan, a health and well-being information and support. With this commitment, the government will empower people to manage their care and the impact of their cancer beyond the immediate physical symptoms. Excuse me while I turn over the page. Furthermore, Mr. Mayor, we have been forced to present an amendment to this motion tonight because the original brought by the Labour group ignores everything that has been done, all that is being done and everything that has been pledged by this government, this Conservative government. It's just willful ignorance. It should have, some evidence should have gone into that report. You might produce it now, but it's a little late. If members of the council wish to write to the government, then let it be a letter to thank them for the billions of pounds of support and the proactive way in which the government is recognising mental health issues and supporting people and their charities who help them. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have finished, Mr. Mayor.
Are you not finished?
Yes, I have finished.
Councillor Winkler.
Councillor Winkler.
You won't mute.
Councillor Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I formally second the motion and reserve my right to speak at the end? However, on a point of order, can I point out that the published papers, the Conservative group's amended motion still contains paragraph 4 from the original motion text. This should have been removed and replaced with the bold text that's shown beneath. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Noted, thank you. Okay. Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Sullivan and I sit on the Joint Scrutiny Committee for Pennine Care Mental Health. We have both seen how the underfunding of mental health providers, together with a lack of available staff, have put huge pressures on the workforce and left Pennine Care struggling to provide services. Of course, I, like Councillor Sullivan, welcome the government's additional funding pledge, and I also acknowledge wholeheartedly the role played by the volunteers across our borough. However, I am totally opposed to the idea of the Chief Executive writing to the Secretary of State to thank him for now increasing funding to help us cope with the perfect storm in mental health, which is of the government's making. In January of this year, the British Medical Association highlighted the dire shortage of mental health professionals, including nurses. Dr. Andrew Malagosta said that a mental health workforce is, and I quote, near breaking point. Mr. Mayor, that was in January of this year. Now we all know about the extra pressures COVID-19 have put on our mental health services. But the pandemic, it can be argued, took us by surprise. The results of 10 years of underfunding of mental health is not a surprise. Politics is always about making choices. Our values inform our choices. Austerity was always a choice based on the ideology of consecutive Conservative governments that the NHS, like other public services, should be cut back. The banking crisis which caused the global recession was not the fault of a Labour government, as some Conservatives would have us believe. It was the fault of greedy bankers who crashed the world economy. And it was shameful for the governments since 2010 to choose to make our public services pay the price for the greed of selfish bankers. Mr. Mayor, I will not be supporting this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor O'Rourke.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. You know, I've never been upset by an amendment that said been sent to this council. And for the first time, I am upset. Thankful. There is a mental health crisis sweeping the nation. And we put this motion forward as a group because we recognise that and it needs to change. We also very deliberately avoided the politics in the motion because no government's got it right on mental health services. None of them. It was always a Cinderella service in the last Labour government. It's still a Cinderella service now. And, you know, each and every one of us here knows someone who's been affected by the scourge of mental health issues. People who just don't know why they wake up in the morning and what's wrong, and they can't quite work it out. And this amendment asks those people to be thankful when they've not been able to get the services that they need. It's just awful, frankly. And anyone reading this amendment will, who knows someone who's been affected by mental health services, will see right through it. If the Tory group were to revise their amendment, and perhaps, you know, we could rewrite the first amendment, the first motion in the first place to get cross-party support. I think we'd do it because this is too important an issue for the rough and tumble and the pernicious accusations of that have come out so far. I would really, if I was a Conservative councillor and Councillor Sullivan and Councillor Winkler, please consider rewording this amendment pretty swiftly, because at the moment it's just an insult to every single person who knows or has suffered from mental health issues. It's not a good look for anyone here. Think again on this, and quickly.
Thank you, Councillor O'Rourke. We are running a little bit long on this motion, but it's a passionate one, and I fully understand the feeling of the members, so I'm going to let it run on a little bit longer. Councillor Meredith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Out of all the motions this evening, this one I thought would have not been amended. Rochdale Borough currently has a mental health crisis. I care for residents every shift in mental health crisis, which has not been addressed due to not correctly funding services that should have been in place. The funding crisis in mental health services started way back before COVID. It is estimated that 97% of residents have been affected by mental health directly or with family and friends. I thank the Conservative Party for the amendment because it actually highlights incompetence of the Conservative government. It is very concerning that this money, or should I say a national soundbite, has been announced, which long term will actually take them to the next general election. It's a coincidence there. Help for vulnerable residents is not needed in 5 years, it's needed now. I am curious if this national pot of money will make it to Haywood Middleton and Rochdale CCG. The Conservative government have not settled any COVID-related bills with local authorities or NHS services, but yet savings are still needed. This grandstanding amendment, which has nothing to do with supporting local residents and only to do with supporting their own incompetent national party. In my opinion, this amendment should be voted against this evening. Unfortunately, I am unable to stay for the rest of the meeting because I have to go to work myself. But some of these eye-watering figures locally in Rochdale Borough are 12,310 children and 55,000 adults have a diagnosed mental health condition. Let's put that into perspective. The population of Middleton is 45,000, and that doesn't include the unseen COVID-related mental health. The BBC are even reporting that 30% on last year that suicide rates are up. I am thankful of the ongoing work the council, the CCG and charities who continue to work in extreme circumstances provide. But to finish, it's great to have a long-term plan, but the problem is now, stop playing party politics and work with us to identify the problem to the government. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rayner, could you keep it quickly as you can possibly do, Councillor Rayner? We're still on the amendment and we've got the actual motion to discuss after.
Mr. Mayor, I will try my best, at least 2-3 minutes. I'll try my best.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Conservative amendment tonight is about making excuses for the government, then standing up for the people of Rochdale. Mental health problem accounts for 23% of the burden of disease in United Kingdom, but spending on mental health services consumes only 11% of the NHS budget. The amendment mentions about funding of 2.3 billion, but the fact is the Chancellor's long-term plan for NHS is in tatters as the government plan massive public sector cutbacks to pay for the coronavirus. This looked like another oven-ready deal, Mr. Mayor. But Mr. Mayor, the government funding is not the whole story. And mental health can affect anybody but everybody. I always felt that I was strong being a military man, but in 2010, my brother passed away with bowel cancer. And I was under severe mental issues and severe mental problem that I almost went to harm myself. And I almost thought about killing myself. I had to go under severe treatment by the doctors, and I was on depression for a long time. My mother in the same house, she wasn't that lucky because she couldn't read English. She couldn't understand English. She couldn't understand a bit of anything. She was sanctioned to go to the Birchill Hospital, where whenever we went to the hospital to see her, she was sitting on the floor in the corridors every time we went there because she could not express herself. She could not explain herself. Whereas everybody else would be sitting in the TV lounge, eating food or talking to each other. I know mental health issue could be there, but they were easily communicating with each other. And then, Mr. Mayor, she was so upset mentally that we had to take her to Fairfield Hospital, and she was given out-of-date sandwiches twice just because she could not read, she could not explain, or she could not do anything. Does that mean those people from the BAME community who cannot express themselves or they can explain themselves, do they need to be treated differently? No, Mr. Mayor. I think there are serious inequalities in the mental health system and the government need to do more. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Winkler, you may wish to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Oh, I've listened to what's been said, but just a few weeks ago, the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care spoke about this matter. It was extremely encouraging that as part of the 5-year funding offer that's going to see the annual NHS budget grow by 33.9 billion, mental health services will receive a budget growth of 2.3 billion over the next 5-year funding settlement. That's the fastest uplift in funding. By providing that funding, the Conservative government is enabling further service expansion, faster access to community and crisis mental health services for both adults and particularly children and young people. I'm pleased that new mental health crisis service with comprehensive mental health support will be available at every major A&E, along with new children and young people's crisis teams across the country. The additional funding will also deliver more mental health ambulances, safe havens in the community, and a 24-hour mental health crisis hotline for when people are in urgent need of help. I'm hoping that these new services and the funding is going to help end the stigma around mental health and offer that crucial support to the people who need it most. Mr. Mayor, far from needing a lecture from our Labour benches, this government is well aware of the issues and they're taking a firm hand to deal with them. That is why we're saying, let's not write and try and educate them. Let's write and thank them and ask them to continue the support that they're already giving. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sullivan, you have a final right to reply.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I've nothing to add to what Councillor Winkler said, and the same old things keep being trotted out by the Labour group. It doesn't surprise me at all. But I would just like to point one thing out that has confused me in this whole thing. I've read and read again this motion, and the first sentence of the first paragraph notes that in the face of continued uncertainty and disruption, this means that sufficient funding and resources are made readily available to the NHS. That's saying the government is actually doing the job. That's why I was only unhappy with the fourth paragraph. The rest of it, certainly the first paragraph, say the government is doing the funding. I don't think you meant to say that, actually. It's just very badly written. So you need to look at what you've written sometimes before you produce it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We're now going to the vote on the amendment. Okay. Again, could you speak very clearly for, against, or abstain? Councillor Iftikhar Ahmed.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Shakil Ahmed.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Delatale.
Definitely against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sultan Ali.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bamford.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Besford.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bezic. Councillor Blundell.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Boris.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Brett.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Burke.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Cox.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dale.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Davidson.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dutton.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Neil Emmett.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Susan Emmett.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Janet Ermsley.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Garthside.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hartley.
Strongly against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Eakin.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Holly.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Warren.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hussain.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Joinson.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kelly.
Against.
Councillor Malcolm.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Martin.
Against.
Councillor Massey.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Meredith. Councillor Sean O'Neill.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor O'Rourke.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Palucci.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rana.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rashid.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Robinson.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Robotham.
Strongly against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rush.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Smith. Susan.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Smith Angela. Angela Smith.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sullivan.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Taylor.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wardle.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor West.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Williams. Donna,
Absolutely against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Williams Peter,
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Winkler,
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Waith,
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Zahir,
Against, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Zaman.
Against, Mr. Mayor.
The amendment is lost. We now move back to the initial motion now. Can I ask any members who wish to speak on the original motion, please indicate so now. Councillor Smith, you have a final right to...
Councillor Winkler, Mr. Mayor.
Someone indicated.
Councillor Winkler, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Winkler, you have a right to speak.
Sorry, to speak on the substantive motion, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So, Mr. Mayor, I'm not going to go over all the things we've already heard. Councillor Sullivan picked up on the first paragraph of the substantive motion. Now, it is badly written, and I'm sure it is a typographical error and quite an embarrassing one for the Labour group, because that paragraph states that the government are providing sufficient funds and resources to NHS and care workers. It says the government are responding to people's urgent health and social care needs, and it acknowledges that the government are providing services which work effectively alongside existing health and social care services. Now, I understand it's probably, like I say, a very embarrassing typo, but it is in complete contradiction to paragraph 4 of the substantive motion. Can I suggest, we've actually had an offer from the Labour group to work together to put a motion together that we can get cross-party support on. Given that this substantive motion is self-contradictory, can I suggest that it's withdrawn and we actually do that and we get a motion together that we can get cross-party support on?
Yeah.
Who wishes to speak?
Councillor Taylor.
Councillor Taylor. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I guess this builds on what Councillor Winkler has just said, because I look at the original motion and I see it as a missed opportunity. I don't know whether Councillor Smith or Meredith, I don't know why they didn't ask for a greater slice of the available funding. My view was quite clear on this one. We've regularly featured in the top 10 of places with the highest infection rate, and we've got the highest number of people suffering, and that leads on to increased numbers of people with mental health. I have absolutely no issue with that. But my thoughts are we should be moving forward, and it would have been perfectly reasonable to ask for a percentage of funding that's commensurate with the degree of suffering across our borough. If we do go down the line of a joint motion, I think that's a point that we should put in there and try and get more money into this borough to deal with the people who need it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Palucci.
Councillor Palucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I could only reiterate what my colleagues have said. It seems I don't understand why you would think that the government are not interested or are not completely, they don't know what's going on. Mental health affects everybody. The Conservative government have been clear, very clear in its belief that children and young people should be able to access mental health support in the places where they spend the majority of time, not just the NHS, but in communities, schools and homes. The Health and Wellbeing Fund is leading the way in ensuring government plays a role in cultivating the most effective, innovative and successful forms of community support. I would have hoped that members in the opposite benches would have been aware of the billions of pounds of funding pledged by this government specifically to support mental health projects, and understand that they do think, that they do know how much in crisis we are. We're not saying that we're not in crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Now, the debate is now coming to an end, so I just want to ask Councillor O'Rourke, who's substituting for Councillor Meredith, who's had permission to go early because of work. So, Councillor O'Rourke, can you speak on behalf of Councillor Meredith?
Aye, I can, Mr. Mayor. Do you want to know why? I'll speak, Mr. Mayor. Don't worry.
Keep it quick.
Do you know what? Do you know why? We're angry with this motion, and why the opportunity of cross-party working has been thrown away. During the speeches that we've just heard, one colleague disclosed significant mental health issues. Very bravely so, I should add. And it was dismissed as same old Labour nonsense. I am getting palpitations right now because the words I want to say would lead to me having to make an apology at the next full council meeting. But needless to say, I am thoroughly disgusted right now. Do you want to know why we don't think you're taking it seriously? Because that's how you treat this issue. And that's what you've just said and done. And if you don't believe it, rewatch the YouTube after. Look at yourselves in the mirror later. I'll come clean. I'm someone who suffered from mental illness in the past. And I'm forever thankful to Councillor Cllr Emmett when, having suffered with depression, I was lying in bed one day, missed an event with Councillor Rush and Dutton. Councillor Emmett phoned me to say, "Blooming heck, Liam, they're a bit annoyed at you." And he then spent an hour on the phone with me as I broke down. Those services weren't available. In fact, when I finally got a GP appointment, it was, "So what pills do you want, Liam?" I hope to God that it improves. I hope to God this 5 billion or whatever figure you're telling me, I hope to God it works. I hope to God it's the thing. But on the basis of previous evidence, I cannot take it seriously. And we cannot take it seriously until we get a response that shows that things are improving. I'm lucky. Over the years, I've been able to get myself together, and with the support of family, friends, comrades, whatever pronouns you want to use, I've done it. I'm bloody lucky. There are thousands, if not millions, in this country who aren't lucky. There are thousands in this borough who are not lucky. And the problem is, you talk about the mental health ambulances, for example. Those are the people who are sadly right at the end of that mental illness journey, where they have committed to self-harm, where they have committed perhaps to try and take their own lives. It's the people who wake up every morning, who don't know who to talk to, who don't talk to somebody, who eventually think, and they might feel they're in a dead-end job, staring at a screen every day, not knowing how to work or what to do. Those are the people who need looking after, not the people at the end of the journey. And that's why holistic mental health services need to be taken seriously now. And that's why we need to pass this motion as it is. And I'd just like to thank the comrade who's just sent me a text saying, "Your mates, I love you, Liam. You're a beautiful person." Okay? There is something we can do about this. Let's pass this motion. Let's pass it unanimously, and let's get the services that we all need and deserve in this borough and across the country. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor O'Rourke. Councillor Smith now have a final right of reply, and we've discussed this quite in depth and passionately. So could you please keep it to a very small amount of time, please? I appreciate it if you would do that. Okay.
Well, I will do, Mr. Mayor, but I don't really think there's anything else to say. I mean, I'm totally shocked and gutted at the reaction of the Conservatives, for one, especially Pat Sullivan. She sits next to me on the Pennine Care Trust mental health team, and she sees every single meeting we go to. She sees that at the top of the agenda is they need more funding, they need more services, they need more resources. They actually tell her that every time we go to a meeting. So I'm totally shocked at what you've just said, Pat. And as for looking at the motion time and time again, nitpicking at all the mistakes I've made in that, and yeah, it was me that written it, and yeah, I might have made a few mistakes, Pat, but I'll tell you now, I'm happy that I've still put it forward, and I can hold my head up high. I don't know whether you can though, Pat, after reacting to the way you did to all my colleagues' stories. So I'd like to thank all my Labour colleagues for supporting this motion. We need action now. We need this funding to get to us now, not in 5 years' time. 5.2 billion in 5 years' time. That's no good. We need it now. There's people deteriorating. Children are self-harming. I think it's like a 9-month wait now to get to CAMS. That might double, they say. There's one statistic for you. That might double within the next 3 months. So how can you sit there and say that the government are doing everything that they can? No, they're not. And if they are talking it, then they don't need to talk the talk. They need to walk the walk and take action. And thank you for your support.
Now we're going to move to the vote on the motion. Okay. Councillor Iftikhar Ahmed.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Shakil Ahmed.
For Mr. Mayor.
Delat Ali.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sultan Ali.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bamford.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Besford.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bezic. Councillor Blundell. Councillor Boris.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Brett.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Burke.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Cox.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dale.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Davidson.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dutton.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Neil Emmett.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Susan Emmett.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Janet Ermsley.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Garthside.
Against Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hartley.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Eakin.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Holly.
Against Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hussain.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Joinson.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kelly.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Malcolm.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Martin.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Massey.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor O'Neill.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor O'Rourke.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Palucci.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rana.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rashid.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Robinson.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Robotham.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rush.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Smith.
Susan.
Susan.
For Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Councillor Angela Smith.
Against Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Patricia Sullivan.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Taylor.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wardle.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor West.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Donna Williams.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Peter Williams.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Peter Winkler.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Waith.
For Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Zahir.
100% for Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Zaman.
For Mr. Mayor.
The motion is carried.
Mr. Mayor, it's Councillor Warren. You didn't read me out in any name. Can you please record that I abstain as well?
I apologise for that. Okay.
No problem. Thank you.
We move on to motion number 4 now. Councillor Davidson, will you please move the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I also thank Council for accepting this motion to go forward to this evening's meeting? As you all know, in my past life, my working life, I worked for the prison service, and I learned a lot from the prison service, not only from its inmates of what was going on in the real world, but also in other ways. And the reason why I bring this motion to council is I'm extremely impressed with the work that Our Streets Now campaign is doing. And I'd like to read out just one or two aspects from that website. But before I do, over the past few months, we've had a few problems in our village with for the young ladies that go to school of being harassed by individuals. And I witnessed myself in the village while the children were coming out of school, people shouting from their cars, not very nice things to the young women. And there was young men there as well who overheard what was going on. They did it in such a way that the young people couldn't even respond to what was going on. But it was just sad to see, and it was sad to see the reaction from the young people as well. After going to having a talk with the young folk, realizing that they didn't know how to handle what was going on. I knew nothing about Our Streets Now until I went on the internet, and I spoke to a colleague in Oldham who pointed me in the right direction to find them. And what I've found from them is absolutely wonderful work that they're doing. As you know, or if you don't know, approximately 14% that are brought, only 14% of them have been taught about public sexual harassment. Nearly half would not report to their school because they didn't know how to, or feared they would not be taken seriously. 72% of those who did report it got a negative response. This leaves young women, anyone who is harassed in the streets, feeling that this is a taboo and they don't really matter. They are not right. They have not got the right to complain about it. They feel frightened. They feel ashamed. They feel they cannot be themselves. That is why it's so important that we change the culture around this. And that's why I want to see schools teaching properly about this, that public sexual harassment as a specific offence. And that's why this motion is calling for a change in the law. It is about making sure that our schools are well informed and are having those conversations with children to tell them that this kind of thing should not be happening and that harassment is not happy. It is not a taboo. It is something they don't have to put up with. If someone talks to you and says things like, that's not okay, and breaks down that barrier, then that's the first step in anybody's life not to be afraid, not being ashamed, and to being themselves. Can I say, in my past life, of those who've known me for a long time, I've always been tall, I've always been stocky, and what I've had to put up with personal comments to me, and it still happens, people still can't get used to seeing such heavy women like myself over 6 foot, and I still get those comments, but I am older and I can cope with it. But there are young people that we know that surround us, they cannot cope with it. Sorry, I've lost my page. But as I also want to say to anyone out there, this is not okay, and you can talk about it. There are supports out there for you. Wherever it is, you can find support, and that is why I would like to put forward this motion. There are places like Women's Aid or Refuge, St Mary's in Manchester, or Survivors in Manchester, or the Survivors Trust in the NSPCC, who I fully support and have done in the past. So many more to go where someone can listen to you, because someone will listen to you. Mr Mayor, I know we're going to be here all night. That's just a brief bit of my little speech. Can I just finish off with one thing? The first time I was ever sexually harassed by a stranger in the street, this young lady was aged 9, was directly outside the church she used to go to. This is just one excerpt from Our Streets Now. If anybody wants to go onto the website, please read it, see some pictures of the young women that it is helping and has helped, and that it hopes to help in the future. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Davidson. Councillor Bamford, will you second the motion, address the council, or indicate if you wish to reserve your right to reply later?
Yeah, I'll second the motion, Mr. Mayor. Just to add on to that, it's a very important motion for myself, being a husband and a father of 2 young girls. Yeah, just to think that it's 66% chance of one of my girls being harassed and anybody else's girl, you know, everybody has the same feeling. I'm not going to carry on through everything I've wrote tonight because I know we've got a lot of time, but one thing I will say is I do believe tonight about this motion that we have a full support of cross-party. No party politics tonight on this one.
Thank you, Councillor Bamford. There is a submitted amendment to this motion, and I'm going to move to this straight to this amendment immediately. Can I ask Councillor Cox to move the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I want to thank Councillor Davidson for her motion this evening, because I think it is really, really important, and for highlighting an issue that makes us all feel, well, us women, feel unsafe on our streets at times. But there are others in our community who are also subjected to sexual harassment because of their race, sexuality, or gender identification. And we want to ensure that everyone feels safe on the streets of our borough. However, the harassment, sometimes sexual, always intimidating, is damaging people's lives. So I want to share a few stories that I hope will help people reflect. A trans woman on a tram is pointed out by other passengers who follow her off the tram and start laughing at her. A lesbian is confronted with, "You dress like a man. Can you fight like a man?" A young gay man has to walk past a group shouting, "Bum boy" and "faggot" at him. And I don't wish to offend anyone with this language, but how would you feel if it was said to you, "We all know you black guys are well hung, so show us what you've got"? You might say these are just words, but as Councillor Davidson has pointed out, younger people don't have the resources that we do as older people who are more skilled and more experienced, and have the support that we have. So the amendment we propose are as published in the papers, but they are just an addition. They are no way undermining the good work that Councillor Davidson has highlighted. Thank you.
Councillor Eakin, will you second the amendment and address the council, or indicate if you wish to reserve your reply until later?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to second Councillor Cox's amendment, as I believe that all members of our community should be able to live their lives free from harassment. No one should be picked on or bullied because of their race, sexuality, or gender identity. Too many times in the past, we've not been able to do the right thing to discourage this type of harassment. However, I would be a bit wary of asking schools to write a separate policy. Insisting that all 100 and odd schools write a separate policy is just something we cannot do. We simply do not have the powers to make it happen, because schools are in charge of their own many policies, with no authority to insist or impose a policy on our schools. However, we are very supportive of the motion, and I know that our education support staff would be happy to give schools guidance. Also, policy writing can become a bit tokenism as well. It'd be far more effective if we embed it in existing active policies. Well, we've got a Healthy Schools Teacher and Learning Advisor, Andrea Eadsford, in post. She works closely with primary and secondary schools on health education, and that includes a focus on healthy relationships. So through network meetings and training, we are able to raise the awareness of education around sexual, racial and gender identity harassment as part of our PSHE. That would help us to create an environment where street harassment is seen and it's policed as a crime, where girls, women, BAME and LGBT people feel safer on our streets. In that way, we'll be able to ensure that the recommendations of our New Schools Now report are communicated to schools with a view to integrating recommendations into their PSHE policy. Each school should embed a clear policy on sexual, racial and gender harassment within their bullying policy and their health education policy. And I think these steps would be more welcomed by schools instead of creating an additional policy. So, Mr. Mayor, I'd therefore like to second this amendment.
Councillor Eakin. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to be absolutely clear what my thoughts are around these vulnerable people. All vulnerable groups should rightly demand our protection and support. Any form of harassment is totally unacceptable and must be challenged. Having visited the Our Streets Now webpage, I applaud the ambition of the people who set it up and their determination to work to address the inequality. I do think this is basically a good idea and one that deserves progressing. But it feels like a safeguarding issue, but that word isn't being mentioned in there, and I really do think it should be, because that's what it is. And it feels like a work in motion to me at the moment. I think about the legislation aspect of this. I genuinely don't know that we need another piece of legislation. Coming from a police background, I'm aware of the kinds of legislation that's in place already. We've got Section 5 of the Public Order Act, which is there to deal with conduct that's likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress. Section 4A of the same piece of legislation adds the element of intention, so that makes it slightly more serious. Section 4 of the Act gives the fear of violence added to it as well. So it builds up a picture and a level of, the seriousness of the offence. We've got the Protection from Harassment Act, which the sole aim of that bill was to protect victims from harassment. These are bread and butter offences for the police to deal with day in, day out. The list goes on and on. We've got civil injunctions, restraining orders, breach of peace, indecent exposures, a whole range of assaults. So my thoughts on this one, and I really do want to help this move forward, is there are two questions we need to be asking first. Is there a need for existing legislation to be used more? And that's a question of policy, stated cases, and prioritisation around vulnerability. The second question I would ask then is, perhaps this should be directed towards the CPS and the police in the first instance, rather than the Home Secretary. When we've got answers to those two questions, I do think we've got more chance of success moving forward with this motion. Can I suggest that this motion, rather than be voted on tonight, is developed and brought back to the next council meeting as a very robust piece of supportive work around people who are vulnerable in our community, so we can all vote for it and try our level best to get the protection for a vulnerable group within our community. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I'm going to move on to Councillor Sullivan now, and then I'm going to ask Councillor Davidson to finish up the comments on this. Okay, on the amendment. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank Councillor Davidson for bringing this forward. I have the only problem I have with it, because I hate to think, as we all do, anybody is verbally and sexually in any way attacked in the street like that. It's just horrific. Nobody should have to go through it. Unfortunately, it is a fact of life, but that doesn't make it right, does it? I am concerned about another level of legislation here, Councillor Davidson. We'd like to support it. Honestly, we would, but it just seems directed in and I agree with what Councillor Taylor said, and I would like it brought back again so we can support it, because it's what you're saying is true. The only thing that slightly worries me again about it is the fact that we say the schools aren't responding. I find that very hard to believe, because that's what they're supposed to be doing now, and Councillor Smith, who was a teacher for many years, sort of didn't think this was quite true. That perhaps some of the information he got wasn't quite valid. I don't know. People don't always. They sometimes say what they think you want to hear. Can we look at it again, Councillor Davidson? Can we have it directed in another way? And do we have a lot of legislation for hate crime and sexual crime and anything like that, and harassment? And I'm just worried about.
We gone to the amendment, didn't we?
Sorry. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for bringing it forward, Irene. Anyway.
I've had another request from one of the elected members, and I'm going to let Councillor Winkler say a few words, and I want Councillor Davidson to finish, and I will not accept any more members coming in on this now. Thank you. Councillor Winkler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I did ask earlier, and I think you must have missed it in the comments. So thank you. First of all, I want to separate these two. I'm speaking now specifically on the amendment. I completely understand the sentiment from Councillor Davidson on the substantive motion. She speaks a lot of sense, and to be honest, as someone who has personally received verbal and physical issues over the years on this, I completely agree and understand with what she's saying, and I wasn't aware of the website that you've mentioned, but I would like to be, very much so. I'm just very concerned that the amendment to this adds a degree, quite frankly, of politically correct wokery. There seems to be a desperation to jump on some sort of virtue signalling bandwagon to add some groups in and they've left some groups out, and they've basically, Mr. Mayor, done the wokey-cokey with this amendment. In seriousness, it's looking to reinvent laws which already exist. Councillor Taylor has gone over those. And these are laws that have been debated and written and approved in the interest of keeping everyone safe. The laws that we have are very comprehensive and very broad for a good reason. We need to protect everyone without prejudice. Quite frankly, Mr. Mayor, I was annoyed, and I do think the amendment is sexist and racist and discriminatory. There will be white heterosexual men and boys in our borough, sons and fathers and husbands and granddads, who look at this motion and wonder why some of the people in this virtual chamber think that their protection should be held in less high regard than somebody else. They might even consider, Mr. Mayor, that this motion is inadvertently singling them out as part of a problem. So what sort of message is the amendment sending to those people? We've got legal protections against sexual and other forms of harassment, should be and are already in place for everyone, and they must be. People must be confident to come forward and feel protected and feel safe, but it must be everyone. We can't single out groups. In understanding that the protection already exists, I'm confident that I can vote against the motion, the amendment to the motion, and be reassured that we can look at the substantive motion and maybe work to something which does not single out certain groups and, I'm sorry, look to shame others. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Winkler. Councillor Davidson, could you reply, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The main drive of this motion was to protect young women in society from public sexual harassment. It is specific to that section of the community, and whilst we recognise that other groups suffer from harassment, we would not want to dilute the message that our streets now do. Having worked so hard for however PHS is on intersectional issues, a victim identity is not just about gender, through gender, though, and includes race, disability and sexuality. This can compound their experience as perpetrators exploit the many vulnerabilities in a victim's identity. However, in the spirit of cooperation, we will accept the amendment if the council agrees to write the amendment actions separately in order to recognise public sexual harassment, as a specific offence. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Davidson. The amendment now, Councillor Cox, do you want to speak on the amendment now before I go to the vote, or can I go to the vote immediately?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank Councillor Davidson for her generosity of spirit and say how disappointed I am in Councillor Winkler's response. I would like to move the amendment be taken forward. Thank you.
I just had advice. Do you accept what Councillor Davidson has just proposed?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm now going to the vote now. This is for the amendment. Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Is a vote needed if it's accepted?
Yes, I'm with Councillor O'Rourke. If the amendment is accepted, then the amended motion should be the one that goes to the vote, not the amendment. Can I have a ruling on that, please?
Yes. Yes, that's a ruling. Yes. We're going
Thank
with
you,
that.
Mr. Mayor. So we're not having a vote until we finish the debate. So the amendment is accepted.
Yes.
Councillor Davidson has asked for a way to do it. So unless anybody else wishes to speak, or Councillor Davidson, can I suggest we now move to the vote on the amended motion, Mr. Mayor?
That's what my intention is, Councillor Brett. Okay. I'm moving to the vote now. Okay. Councillor Cllr Emmett. Oh, it's not here. Cllr Emmett.
For.
Councillor Delatale.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Sultan Ali. Councillor David Bamford.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Besford.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Boris. Councillor Brett.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Burke.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Cox.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dale.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Davidson.
Sorry, for, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dutton.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Neil Emmett.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Susan Emmett.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Janet Elmsley.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Gardside.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hartley.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Eakin.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Holly.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wayne. Warren. Councillor Warren.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Hussain.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Joinson.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kelly.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Malcolm.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Martin.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Massey.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor O'Neill.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor O'Rourke.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Palucci.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rayner.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rashid.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Robinson.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Robotham.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rush.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Susan Smith.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Angela Smith. Councillor Angela Smith.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Patricia Sullivan.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor John Taylor.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Carol Wardle.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor June West.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Donna Williams.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Peter Williams.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Winkler.
Abstain, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wythe.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Zahir.
For, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Zaman.
For Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, everyone. The amendment is carried. No one has voted against, and I've had 6 abstentions. Thank you. Can I move on now?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, you didn't ask for my vote. Councillor Bezic.
Chair.
Councillor Bezic. I apologise, I've got a very fragmented sheet here with names crossed out, so I apologise for that. Councillor Bezic.
Oh, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. I apologise, Jackie. Right. We're moving on now. Can members now refer to the reports in the agenda paper pack, and any questions and comments submitted are listed in the supplementary paper pack. Now, can I remind members that their written questions have been circulated by email, and those members who have submitted written questions are also able to ask one supplementary question. Now, do not attempt to do a roll call for any of the following items. So should members wish to vote by the roll call or call by a named vote, please indicate by raising your hands or in the chat function. If you understand that, if you wish to make a comment there, you've got to use the chat function. Item number 6 on the agenda is the statement of licensing policy for 2021 to 2026. Councillor Robotham, will you please move the report?
I formally move the report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Cox, will you please second the report?
I second the report.
Any members to comment? Now, can I ask any members to indicate now via the chat function if they're not in agreement with the recommendations in the report? I shall wait 20 seconds. Okay. Thank you. With a majority of members in favour, the recommendations are approved. Moving on to item number 7, this 2020-2040 Transport Delivery Plan and District Local Implementation Plan. Councillor Brett, will you please move the report?
Mr. Mayor, I formally move. I've had some comments behind the scenes. This plan is relevant whether the GMS is adopted or not. And although Stockport throughout the GMSF plan, it adopted the transport plan. This transport plan is absolutely vital for Rochdale, just as the GMSF was. In this plan, hopefully, Slattock railway station will be built and the Metrolink will come to Middleton, as well as all the other things. If there are any questions, I'm quite willing to answer them, but I urge everybody to get behind this plan. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Neil Emmett, will you second this report?
Formally second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We have a question from Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Take it as read.
Take it as read. Councillor Brett, to respond to the question.
The one about the GMSF. In light of that, then where the plan needs to be amended with where the GMSF is, it will be, but that is no reason for us to delay, because funding for the city regional transport projects was announced in the spending review last month, and the mayoral CAs have asked to set out our priorities for investment. So approval of the 5-year delivery plan will therefore be the basis of our funding ask of the government next year, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brett. We have a question from Councillor Holly.
So, can I have a supplementary, please?
Can you have a supplementary? Yes, you're allowed a supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Brett, in the policy, it talks about a target of at least 50% of travel to be on public transport or active transport by 2040. I think for my ward, that's overly ambitious. And the concern I've got then is we've got areas of land that developers may come in and wish to build on, and they'll use that target of 50% on public transport as a means to build and without the necessary infrastructure being put in place. How can that vulnerability be circumvented and mitigated?
What I find amazing about Councillor Taylor, I've sat here quietly all night listening to some of his right-wing views, and when I come to follow government policy, and this is government policy, we are being asked to do all these things under the government policy of trying to do these things, just as the GMSF was based on government policy. So this is what we're doing. We're going in along with the government and joining in the government's bidding system so we can get our transport infrastructure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We have a question from Councillor Kelly.
Sorry, you just broke up there, Mr. Mayor. Is it me?
Councillor
Holly.
Councillor Holly's next, yeah.
Say again.
Councillor Holly's next, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Holly.
It's not in my sheet as Councillor Holly. Okay. Councillor Holly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you take the question as read, please?
Thank you.
Well, I could if I had the, through you, Mr. Mayor, I could take it as read if I had it, but I don't know. Could he perhaps read it to me? Because unlike you, Mr. Mayor, I haven't got a script in front of me and I haven't got the sufficient technical skills to get me screen up, etc. And you might have seen me disappear briefly because, of course, after a certain amount of time, the computer throws you out. So if Councillor Holly reads this question to me, I will answer it. It goes to show that my answer will be unscripted.
Councillor Brett, I love your unscripted answers. I'll read the question, but I want to add a little sort of explanation to it at the end, which actually will be helpful. At the CRE Over and Scrutiny Committee meeting on the 18th of November 2020, I sought clarification of the apparent inconsistencies of the figures for potential new houses in the Rochdale Borough contained respectively in the 2040 Transport Delivery Plan and the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. I had understood that these apparent inconsistencies would be looked into. The Transport Delivery Plan before us tonight contains exactly the same figures as the plan we scrutinised on the 18th. Can I be assured that the apparent inconsistencies I've referred to have been properly considered and that the assumptions for the delivery of the new houses contained in the transport plan remain valid? Now, to be helpful, I've spoken to Mark Robinson about this, and I think everybody accepts that the figures are inconsistent. But what my concern is, and it's from a governance point of view, is that the correct figures are being picked up within the transport plan, as well as, you know, in the whatever version or whatever happens to the spatial framework going forwards. So it's what I would stress. To me, it's a governance issue. That clearly there are inconsistencies there, and there are things that need to be, if you like, looked into and thought about.
Yeah, I'm being told on the thing that we have the delegation to pick that up. But just to say, the government has today announced new housing target figures, as you're aware. And in their levelling up agenda, because they've had so much protest about the housing figures in the south of England, where they have a few more MPs than even after the games in the north. So once again, they are moving housing targets to the north of England. But they've actually said that they want to target them on cities. Now, whether they just mean Manchester and Salford, I've no idea, or whether their geography is so poor, they perhaps think the whole of the conurbation. But rest assured, that whatever it is, we will follow the relevant government guidelines, which are appropriate or apposite at the moment in time when the plans come forward. And you're right, they keep changing the government, and they keep changing how they calculate the number of houses that they need. But the figure of 300,000 for the country is the one that remains there. But I will double check, and we will send you any amended figures we get, or everybody else.
Thank you, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, can I just follow up on that as a remark, a short remark, rather than a supplementary question? Yeah, it's Councillor Brett. It's not so much the movement of the government figures. It was genuine inconsistency in how the figures were pulled together by Chancellor of Greater Manchester and the council. And Mark Robinson's aware of that. So I look forward to that being clarified and obviously the appropriate new figures put into the appropriate documents.
Yeah, and as I said, because there's now a different set of demands, both sets of figures will have to change.
Agreed.
Thank you. Can I move on now to Councillor Kelly's question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as a point of clarity on the question, what I'd like to do is to welcome the news this week that the Greater Manchester Combined Authority have awarded Rochdale and specifically Middleton and Milnrow active travel funding for the roads and for the centres. As was kind of expected when the announcement came out, there was a backlash in the public that this is just about painting green cycle lanes, when it's clearly not about painting green cycle lanes. It's about making roads safe. It's about making it safe to walk and to cycle. It's about improvement to public realm. It's about improvement to road surfaces and so on and so forth. So whilst I welcome that, in the context of the question, when can we start to see some of these great changes move ahead? And it wasn't meant to be facetious, having reread it. That it's more than just green paint, is my point. There are many other improvements that people are going to see the benefit of, and I'd just like to get a sense of timescale.
I thank Councillor Kelly for that question. I can't give him the timescale, but I will make sure that if it's imminent, that him and everybody else has sent it out. Yes, it's more than, as he says, it's not just cycle lanes, it's about the whole safer travel system. But I will make sure that information goes out as soon as we have it. I understand the one in Castleton. I think Billy may be able to, sorry, Mr. Mayor, may be able to tell me if that's already started.
Councillor Brett, it hasn't started. It's due to go out to public consultation at any day now.
Yeah, right. Well, that when I say started, Mr. Mayor, I meant public consultation.
Correct. Fine.
Yeah. But we will let Councillor Kelly and anybody else know as soon as the public consultation starts.
Councillor Jane Warren, you have a comment.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, can I retract my comment?
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
There's a comment from Councillor Sullivan as well. Could you unmute yourself, please, Councillor Sullivan?
No comment, Mr. Mayor, at this time.
Oh, thank you for that. Any other member? Now, can I advise my members then again, via the chat function, if they are not in agreement with the recommendations on this report? Other than that, we're going to go to 20 seconds and you've got time to do that. So the timing starts now. Thank you. With the majority of members in favour of the recommendations, they are approved. Okay. Item number 8 on the agenda is the appointment of a director for commissioning of adult and social services. Councillor De La Talley, will you please move the report?
I formally move the report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Dale, would you second the report?
Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Any members? No comments? I do not intend to hold a roll call for the following items. So as a member wish to vote again, we're going to do a name vote. We're going to use a chat vote. We're not going to use a name vote. Are we right?
Chat, Mr. Mayor.
We're going to do the chat facility again for 20 seconds to move the motion, move the appointment on. So 20 seconds starts now.
It's okay, Mr. Mayor. Item 9, no specific.
Right. That appointment is carried. Item number 6.
Same time, Mr. Mayor.
Item number 6, the licensing policy.
Move that one.
Just a slight. Correct?
Yeah.
Appointment number 9, the appointment of an independent person. Councillor Carol Wardle, will you please move the report?
Formally move the report, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rana, would you second the report? Any members? Can I again ask members to indicate now via the chat function if they're not in agreement with the recommendations of the report? And I'll wait 20 seconds again. Thank you. The majority of members in favour of the recommendations are approved. Item number 10, Cabinet Portfolio and Responsibilities for the year 2020-21. Councillor Brett, will you please move the report?
Formally move, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Delatelli, would you second the report?
Formally seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We have a comment from Councillor Colucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Take it as read.
Thank you. Councillor Brett, could you respond?
Well, I can. I'm amazed. And all the time that this has been out there and everything else, and it's been to the leaders of both parties, Councillor Durnley and Councillor Kelly, the only comment I got was on some of the titles. Now Councillor Palucci is saying, in a modern world where our communities are that. But shall I say, in a modern council, it's better to understand how the portfolios can support our strategic direction. Traditionally, the portfolios have been structured around services, but now they're aligned with the council's corporate plan. Outcomes to encourage cross-service remits to get out of the silos and to incorporate additional responsibilities on priority policy agendas. The structure had been circulated for the comment, and there is a lot of support, and I'd had no real opposition. And can I say, one of the things is, in this modern world where climate change, we passed a resolution, and it's no good just passing resolutions, you've got to start implementing them. Then we now have a deputy leader for climate change, and that it doesn't follow any service thing. It's the whole ethos of the council. And Councillor Delatelli is also leading on the portfolio as a deputy leader, because I felt that deputy leaders needed to be given slightly more responsibility than other cabinet members, and to help relieve the pressure on the leadership, which has grown during this COVID crisis. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Can I say something, Mr. Mayor?
You can.
Yeah, it's not, I'm not criticising, it's just the titles. Do people understand them? That was all, Councillor Brett.
Right, well, can I say, these have been there for months, and Councillor Durnley said the same, and Councillor Kelly. So I waited for people to come up with different titles. If anybody wants to reflect the titles, I'm always willing to listen.
Okay.
I'm a listening sort of person.
Really? Thank you.
That's
I
understood.
didn't think that sarcastic comment, Councillor Palucci, was needed, and I'm very. I do feel that that sort of comment gets us into bad order.
I think everyone understands. Can we move on? Can I ask any member now who wants to make a comment? No. Can I?
It's just for noting, Mr. Mayor.
Pardon?
It's just for noting.
Can I ask any members to indicate by the chat function now if they're not in agreement with the recommendations of the report? Again, I shall wait 20 seconds for any comment.
Mr. Mayor, can I make a comment? I did ask for a comment, but I think it was missed. It's Councillor Warren.
I am, yes. Okay, I was going to.
It's not to disagree with the motion, so it was just prior to the 20 seconds. If I can just make a comment, if that's okay.
Slightly out of order, but it might have been because we accidentally missed you, so I will go back on that. So I apologise for that. Apologise to the other elected members for that. It's a very difficult thing to do, is to chair a meeting looking at lots of faces on a screen. So I apologise for that. Please bear with me. Jane, carry on.
Fully bearing with you, Mr. Mayor, and it's a really quick comment. I just wanted to echo what Councillor Palucci had said, and it was interesting to hear Councillor Brett. I hadn't realised that we had the option of amending those. So in the past, we have referred to departments and not being clear who's in departments and offices, etc. And it's a bit similar to the motion that I put in last time that I know was kind of poo-pooed but was voted for, so that was great. But it's not always what we think, it's perceptions of residents. And I just wanted to agree with Councillor Palucci that although you may feel that these have been tested and these work well and there's been research done, sometimes people kind of liked it how it was, and you don't always need to change for change's sake. So I just wanted to support Councillor Palucci on her comment. That's all. Thank you.
Can we move to the 20th? Councillor Brett?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
We don't need to vote on this, I understand. It is the leader's decision on the cabinet and how he sets up. But because I'm a Democrat, and because I do listen to people, that's why it was brought here, Mr. Mayor, I understand. And therefore it's not for voting on, but it's for commenting on. I've heard what Jane has said, and if she sends me something in, we'll listen. If she then wants me to send out which departments come under which cabinet member, I'll also send that out. But I think you will have a real problem when it comes to Councillor Sarah Rowbottom, because she covers every single department of the council and other members cover other things. But if that will help, Jane, I will send it out. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Brett. I've just been informed that this is an executive decision and it doesn't need the approval of the full council here. So we can move on. Thank you. Item number 11, the calculation of the 2021-22 tax base. Carol Wardle, will you please move the report? Can you unmute yourself, please, Carol?
Sorry about that. Yes, formally move the report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Rana, will you please second the report?
I formally second the report, Mr. Mayor.
Any member? No. Can I now ask any member to indicate now via the chat function if they're not in agreement with the recommendations in the report? Again, 20 seconds. Majority of members are in favour of that, so that is approved. We're now moving on to item number 12, which is the council tax empty property charges. Carol Wardle, will you please move this report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I formally move this report with the additional recommendation from Cabinet that the recommendation about exemptions on dwellings such as in pubs and shops brought about by enforced closure due to COVID-19 be noted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wardle. Councillor Rana, will you second the report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have made great stride in reducing the number of empty properties in the borough, Mr. Mayor. We have brought 202 properties back into use, and there are 350 properties which have been empty, and out of that 46 have been empty for over 10 years. There's a lot of support and help is available from the council. So if anybody want to get in touch, the doors are open for the council to help. I formally move the report, second the report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I ask any members to indicate? Any members wish to speak?
Yes, Chair. Councillor Holly, Councillor O'Rourke.
Councillor Holly.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all I want to note. Actually, it was good to see that the slight amendment to the policy with regards to properties attached to pubs, etc., which came from the Over and Scrutiny Committee, has actually been adopted by the Cabinet. And it's good to see that they're listening to what the points, constructive points, that are being made by the Over and Scrutiny Committee. Thank you.
Councillor O'Rourke.
Chair, can I just second those comments from Councillor Holly? I'm very, very glad that our beleaguered pubs won't be affected by this policy. They've gone through an absolutely rotten time over the last year, and no doubt they'll continue to go through a rotten time until this vaccine is implemented. And thank you very much to the Cabinet for listening, and cheers to that.
Councillor Taylor.
No, Chair, that's it. That's all.
Is that all? Sorry, that's one from a previous. Is that it then? No other members wish to speak on this? So can I ask any member to indicate now via the chat function if they're not in agreement with the recommendations of the report? We'll wait 20 seconds for any action.
Okay, Mr.
Thank you for that. With a majority of members in favour, the recommendations are approved. Item number 13 is 2021-22, setting the business rate base. Councillor Wardle, will you please move the report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Formally move the report.
Councillor Rana, would you second the report?
I formally second the report, Mr. Mayor.
Any members with comments? Can again ask any members to indicate via the chat function if they're not in agreement with the recommendations in the report. Again, 20 seconds. Okay. Thank you. With the majority of members in favour of the recommendation, they are approved. That concludes the business of this council meeting for this evening. Just like to say one thing before we all leave, before I wish you all a happy Christmas. The Mayor's charity appeal, the booklets for the quiz are out. Please support it as best you can. You're all going to receive an email from the Secretary of the Mayor's Charity giving details of bank details and details of links for the online quiz. There are lots of ways that we can raise money, and at present my charity is suffering rather badly like everybody else's is. But can I say thank you for tonight's meeting. It has been a difficult one. There's been lots of passion. It's been really quite a good meeting in the sense that we've had no major disruptions and we've got through a lot of business. So can I thank you all for that, and also wish you all a very Merry Christmas. Please stay safe. The Mayoress and I are not having our family with us for the very first time ever. We'll be on our own for Christmas, but we're so close to the vaccine, we're so close to winning. Please be sensible, and I want that message to go out. Okay. So
Mr. Mayor. Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to.
Wishing you all a Merry Christmas.
Okay.
Okay, what do you want to say?
Mr. Mayor, I really wanted wanted us to mention the closure of the town hall and to thank you all the staff that are going to be made redundant. I really wanted to do that in this meeting. Can we just acknowledge that, please?
We've acknowledged it now. Thank you, Councillor Palucci. Yeah, we do. I think everyone will endorse what you've said there, because of there have been a wonderful amount of people working there and got a great deal of pleasure going in the town hall by their friendliness. So you are right. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I could interject, please.
Yes. I hope it's positive.
It's something rather important, Mr. Mayor.